Chapter 17 Day 2, 1400 hours. Cameron stared into the magnificent blue eyes of his bride. He tried to keep his body from shaking, to appear in control and strong, but he could not. Sarah stood before him in her beautiful white gown. Tears slowly crept from her eyes and down her cheeks. It was the most radiant sight he had ever seen in his life. "With this ring," Cameron said in broken words, "I'll thee wed. With all I am and all I have, I honor you. I give you this ring as a pledge of my love and commitment. You were my yesterday, you are my today, you will be my tomorrow. All that I am, I give to you." Sarah lowered her head for a moment and looked up at her groom, smiling and crying. Never before had either known such love. Their hearts fluttered at only the sight of each other.
"Cameron and Sarah, bear witness to the love of God in this world, so that those whom love as a stranger will find in you good and generous friends. By the power vested in me by God and man, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride."
Cameron opened his eyes and mouth and gasped for air. The sun was above him, a bed of pebbles was beneath him. Surrounding him were people he barely knew, but people he would trust his life with. They sat, they sulked, and a few wept. Nobody spoke, not until Cameron sat up. "Welcome back," Maria said flatly. She looked exhausted. She and the others were soaked from head to toe. Cameron panted as he looked at them all and nodded. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. "Yeah," Maria nodded. "The kid got knocked in the river, but I invited him to the party and we were able to revive him. The current was strong and carried us far. We clung to driftwood and finally landed here. We are 2 whole zones from where we were." "Jesus," Cameron whispered as he lowered his head and stared at the ground beneath him. "What a mess." "You did a good thing," Gino whispered as he looked over at Cameron. "You saved us. That's so much more than anyone else on this fucking island would do." "I concur," Floof, though drained, added. "I fear for my people, but you, Cameron, you have done well by me. Thank." Cameron sighed and nodded his head. "I just want to do the right thing, guys," he said softly. "I couldn't save everyone. Nobody could have, right?" "My mind is a bit clearer now," Floof sadly replied. "Admittedly, none of us could have done much, my friend. I was a fool to convince everyone we could live harmoniously in this place. A damned fool." Floof slammed his fists against the pebbles beneath him and turned his head away from everyone. Cameron could hear the man sobbing gently to himself and decided to let him be with his emotions. There was nothing he could do for him at the moment. With a grunt, Cameron pushed his sore body up off the ground and looked around him. Behind him, far in the distance, were the mountains he had come from. Ahead of him were cliffs he could not see beyond. He sighed and opened his map. From what he could tell by looking at the map, they were only a single zone away from Bernard. Cameron bit his lower lip and decided that it was time to go and find him. He closed his map and turned to the others. "Okay, guys," Cameron said. "You can all rest here if you want. This area seems pretty well protected. I have a friend nearby. I have to go and get him. I lost track of him yesterday night, and I feel like he may be in danger." "No chance!" Gino spat as he pushed himself up to his feet as well. He grabbed his weapon that was lying on the ground next to him and stepped up to Cameron. "You have my axe." "I concur," Floof nodded as he got to his feet as well. "There will be no running off by oneselfery on my watch. We stick together. We fight as a team." Peg stood up as well and silently nodded, and Maria walked up behind Cameron and placed her hand on his shoulder. Cameron felt good having the support of his friends. He thanked them all and turned to the steep hill next to them. "So I guess we have to climb that," Gino sighed as they all turned and looked up its incline. There were a few groans, but finally Floof took the first step. "Onward to new and exciting territory," Floof declared as he planted his feet into the hill. Everyone else followed close behind, struggling to climb the treacherous monster of a landmass in front of them. It was overgrown with bushes and trees, and on more than one occasion somebody lost their grip and fell to their belly. Fortunately for everyone, however, they worked as a team and quickly scaled the beast.
"Oh, beautiful,"
Bloof declared as they reached the top.
"A blessing indeed."
Cameron stared out into the flat plains ahead of them and sighed with relief that he didn't have to climb any more hills or struggle against any more trees. He smiled as he took a step, but stopped suddenly when he heard the sound of a twig snapping to his right. Cameron glanced around and noticed that everyone was standing still. He thought that perhaps an animal had made the noise, but before he took his party out in the wide open, he wanted to make absolutely certain that nobody was going to pick them off. He looked over at Maria and nodded in the direction that the snapping sound had come from. She crept over and joined him.
"Stay here," Cameron whispered. "If we call out, come help us."
The Eternials nodded, and Cameron and Maria walked toward where Cameron thought the sound had come from.
"Thank you for coming back for us back there," Cameron whispered as the two slowly and cautiously walked forward. "Had you guys not shown up, I would have been a dead man."
"It was all Yasmin," Maria replied. "She's very strong, very capable. I learned a lot from her in the time we were out."
"Either way, I'm glad I found you again before we got out of there," Cameron said. "You're a good friend, and I'm happy to be at your side."
Maria smiled and winked at Cameron, and the two finally stepped into a small clearing.
"Oh, God,"
Maria whispered as she raised her weapon.
"What happened here?"
Bodies lay everywhere, and blood painted the ground. They were unmolested. Nothing from what he could tell had been stripped from them. Cameron's eyes jumped from body to body, and he wondered what on earth could have done such a thing.
"Are these bodies fresh?"
Cameron asked as he looked over at Maria. She knelt down and examined one of them, pressing its blood between her fingertips.
"I mean, the blood is cold and coagulated."
Maria frowned and shook her head.
"But it does look recent."
Cameron took notice of the cuts on the bodies. They hadn't been hacked with an axe or hit with a bludgeon. They hadn't even been shot. No, what he was looking at was slices from a blade, like a sword or something. Something fell from the trees and landed in front of them. Cameron gasped and ignited a fireball, and Maria shot up, raising her rifle. The two of them stood next to a girl who looked to be about 10 or 11 years old. Her hair was blonde and pulled back in a ponytail, and her face was covered in mud and blood. She snarled at Cameron and Maria and extended a shining katana their way.
"Go away," the girl snapped at them. "I don't want to kill you."
"You don't have to."
Cameron shook his head.
"We're not here to hurt you, I promise."
The girl cocked her head at Cameron for a moment, and her eye twitched. She looked around thoughtfully, but then shook her head.
"No, go," she hissed. "Leave me alone." "Honey, listen," Maria said as she stepped forward. "We can help you. We have good people back there who can take care of you. We're like a family, you see. We won't let anyone hurt you." "I won't let anyone hurt me," the little girl argued as she swiped her katana through the air in front of her. "Go now, if you know what's good for you."
Cameron turned to Maria and bit his lip. He glanced back and forth from the girl to Maria and sighed anxiously.
"I can't in good conscience leave this child behind," he whispered. "She's just a kid."
"I mean," Maria said as she looked at the bodies around them, "it looks like she has things under control."
Cameron really couldn't argue with that. There were at least half a dozen bodies around the child. She definitely could hold her own. Something inside him, however, refused to allow a child to be alone in such a dangerous world. With a sigh, he turned from Maria and stepped forward.
"Look, sweetie," he gently whispered to her. "Just come with us. We're nice people. We'd never hurt—"
"Time's up!"
The girl scowled, and with a surprising burst of speed, she charged forward and swung her blade at Cameron, hitting him in the chest and knocking him to his back. Maria yelped and fired her weapon, but the girl swiped at her legs, making contact and knocking Maria to her ass. Maria struggled to draw her pistol, but not before the girl could impale her chest with her weapon. Maria gasped and fell to the ground, knocked.
"No!" Cameron shouted. "Stop it!"
He hurled a fireball at the girl, catching her off guard and knocking her to her back. Cameron pulled his pistol and fired 3 rounds into the child, knocking her. She groaned and tried to crawl away. Quickly, Cameron hurried to Maria and revived her. The others had found them by then and knelt down to help. While they did that, Cameron hurried to the girl and scooped her up in his arms. "Come on, accept the invite," Cameron shouted. "Do it, and I can revive you."
The little girl croaked.
"Accept the invite, sweetie," Cameron pleaded. "We can bring you back." The seconds passed slowly, and Cameron felt they were running out of time. Finally, however, the girl accepted, and the others rushed over to help revive her.
"Take our weapons," Maria snapped. "She's dangerous."
"Don't hurt her," Cameron instructed. "She's just scared." The little girl finally revived, and Cameron set her back down on the ground. She fearfully looked up at the adults surrounding her and snarled at anyone who got too close.
"Stay back,"
she snapped at everyone.
"Give me my sword back." "Listen here, little lady," Maria barked. "We're not here to hurt you. There was no reason for you to stab me like that." "You should have left when I told you," the girl shouted back. "I was just fine by myself." "No," Maria argued. "If you had to kill all these people, you weren't fine. Listen, you need to trust me. You don't understand what's out there. You don't understand what bad men are capable of."
Cameron glanced over at Maria for a moment and then back to the little girl. "What's your name, sweetie?" he asked tenderly.
"Amanda,"
the little girl answered.
"I'm Amanda."
"Hi, Amanda. I'm Cameron." He smiled and held a hand out to her. "Nobody needs to be alone out here, not even grown-ups. I know how you feel. We're scared too, but it's better with friends around. Look, you don't have to talk to us. You don't have to like us, but none of us here would ever leave a little girl out here on her own, no matter how strong she was. And trust me, we all know you're very strong, okay?" Amanda looked up at Cameron for a moment and seemed to deliberate her situation, but finally nodded, perhaps in agreement or just because she had resigned her fate to the group. Either way, Cameron felt better knowing that the child was in their care instead of alone in the wilderness.
"Hello there, little one. My name is Floof, and I would be happy to be your friend. Please tell me, which hot beverage would you find most satisfying?"
Amanda stared up at Floof with blank eyes. She looked at everyone who surrounded her, and with a perplexed expression, finally shook her head no, not bothering to say a word.
"Ah, no issue on my part. Not everyone likes hot beverages."
Floof was clearly not used to his offering of comfort being denied, and he was visibly shaken by the idea that someone wouldn't want a hot beverage.
"I do have a number of pillows and cushions contained within my inventory. Perhaps embracing something soft will bring you comfort. I know it does for me."
Amanda's eyes begged for someone else to come over. Anybody. Floof's expression soured for a moment, but he did not relent.
"No matter. 'Tis understandable, I suppose. Perhaps we can all make camp and play a game. Surely that would satiate your juvenile need for entertainment."
Floof took another step toward Amanda, and she started screaming.
"Ha!"
Floof was surprised by her reaction and fell back on the ground behind him, panting heavily. He angrily pulled out his notepad from his pocket and started vigorously jotting something down on the pages within. He all but stabbed his pen through the paper and looked up at everyone else.
"Please remove this child from my presence.
Get up, Floof."
Gino grabbed his friend by the arm and helped him sit up.
"She's just a kid. Don't let her get to you."
Floof stood to his feet and straightened his cuirass as he shoved his notebook back in his pocket. He stuck his tongue out at Amanda, and Cameron chuckled lightly to himself at the sight. "Are you good to walk, Amanda?" Cameron asked. "Do you think you can cross the plains with us?" Amanda looked behind her and sighed. She was uncomfortable and scared, but she finally nodded and stood up.
"I'm fine,"
she whispered with a lowered head. Cameron knelt down and looked her eye to eye. "I promise you none of us are going to hurt you, okay?"
"Can I have my sword?"
Amanda asked. "Will you hurt any of us with it?" Cameron raised an eyebrow and cocked his head. Amanda shook her own head, and Cameron held out a pinky finger to her. She looked at Cameron with confusion in her eyes, and for a moment she seemed visibly disturbed. "It's a pinky promise," Cameron smiled. "You put your pinky in mine and make me a promise. A pinky promise can
never be broken,"
Amanda whispered. Cameron winced, but then chuckled and leaned forward. "That's right," he said. "A pinky promise can never be broken." Amanda looked at him with even more confusion, but finally nodded her head and latched her pinky onto his. Cameron smiled, but suddenly felt a wave of vertigo. A memory was coming. Darkness quickly overcame him, and he fell backward. Sarah screamed louder than Cameron had ever heard her scream before. Her nails dug into her hand, and sweat dripped down her face as she looked up at him ferociously from the hospital bed she was lying in.
"Come on, baby," Cameron coached. "Breathe! You're doing great! You can do it! You can!"
"I'm fucking trying!"
Sarah roared as she bore down to push again. Another scream came, and Cameron gasped as he watched the tiny gray head pass from her body and into the doctor's hands.
"Oh, God,"
he whispered. It was both the most horrifying and most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life, the arrival of his first child.
"Is she okay?"
"She's fine, sir," the doctor reassured him as the baby slid out of his wife. Cameron shuddered for a split second and then watched in amazement as the baby started to move on its own accord. It let out the faintest of squeaks, and Cameron felt his heart drop into his stomach.
"She's fine!"
Cameron yelled as he looked down at Sarah.
"You hear that? She's fine!"
His face lit up as the sticky-looking baby was placed into his wife's arms, and he looked on in admiration of the person he and Sarah had created together.
"Oh, she's beautiful,"
Cameron whispered as tears streamed down his face. "My very own baby."
"Hi, honey,"
unexhausted Sarah said in the sweetest voice she could muster.
"I'm your mommy."
"I'm your daddy,"
Cameron couldn't help but belt out. The doctor and nurses laughed, and Cameron looked up at them with wide, tearful eyes.
This is the best day of my life,"
he couldn't help but declare.
"I'm a daddy." "Hi, Courtney,"
Cameron cooed as he looked down at his fresh new daughter.
"I love you." "I'm daddy,"
Cameron gasped. He looked around at everyone and smiled, feeling the same feelings as he had experienced in the hospital.
"Oh my God, I'm a daddy."
"That explains why you're so good with that little girl then," Maria smirked. "You're basically the child whisperer around here, unlike Floof."
"Oh yes, let's ridicule Floof for trying to comfort a distressed child,"
Floof replied with a tinge of disdain in his voice. "It would have worked with anyone else," Cameron grunted as he sat up.
"Wrong kid, wrong time, buddy."
Floof groaned, but nodded in agreement. Cameron couldn't keep the wide smile on his face at bay. He was a daddy to a little girl named Courtney. Cameron had to find out what happened, where she was, and how he had gotten to Happy Island. He at the very least wanted to know that Courtney was okay.
"My sword?"
Amanda's voice chirped.
"I pinky promised, so can I have my sword?"
Cameron looked at her, then to Maria, who held the child's weapon. Maria breathed deeply and then stepped up to the child.
"Don't make me regret this,"
Maria said with wide eyes.
"If you hurt any of us, I'll treat you like I would an adult. Mark my words, kid."